Far.
Hey, it says YouTube on the upper corner. I think we're making progress.
Hey.
Yep, this meeting is now streaming live on YouTube.
Wow. Technology. All right, welcome everybody. Happy Saturday morning. You are present at Community Conversations with Dan Noyes and Kate Donnally. And yeah, so we're just gonna run through kind of a brief agenda. As I was saying, this is gonna be a pretty relaxed space, just opportunity to kind of connect, ask questions, get to know each other in the community a little bit better. And just to name, the workings of the government are vast and complex, and there's often a lot of processes that are not always clear. And so there's probably a lot of questions that'll come into this space either today or in the future that Dan and I might not have immediate answers to. But I think part of our purpose here is to gather those questions and understand where people are at and what they're needing, and take them with us and try to help connect people to the resources that they're looking for, or, explore issues further for us to better understand them. I will also just name, I'm gonna be facilitating a bit today, but Dan and I are separate human beings. So the things I say don't speak for Dan necessarily. The things Dan says don't speak for me necessarily. And so if there's ever anything that I say and you're curious Dan's perspective on it, please reach out to him directly. But just to name that, we do a lot together because I think we enjoy each other's company, but it doesn't mean we are one human. So please always keep that in mind. So in terms of Zoom tech guidance stuff, the chat is open, and obviously it's a small group, so we don't necessarily have to use it, but the chat's open and we can use that for sharing links. And also if you want to comment and you don't want to speak it openly, feel free to put it in the chat and we can address it that way. And even though it's a small group, I've kind of found in Zoom world that a little more structure in terms of participation helps things move a little more smoothly. So like what I'm thinking we could do is, does everyone know how to like raise their little hand in the participant section? If not, we don't have to do this. But Anne-Marie and Jessica, is that something you're familiar with or comfortable with?
I'm not. I see participants. What happens if I click on it?
Yeah, so when you click on participants, down at the bottom, do you see something that says raise hand?
I don't yet.
Okay.
I think if you click on reactions,
yeah,
that should say raise hand.
Is that right? Yep, I see it.
They did an update and it changed on some people's stuff. So feel free to shout out, but I think sometimes it's helpful if we're moving through and doing introductions, if you want to go, just like raise that little hand and we'll know that you're comfortable sharing. All right, so with that, if you guys are comfortable, I thought it would just be nice to take a moment and introduce ourselves. And I thought we would start with the guests who are present, and Willa and Brian, and then Dan and I can kind of finish up and talk a little bit about, introduce ourselves and kind of the work that we've been doing. So who, besides me and Dan, wants to go first?
I can start. Hi guys, my name is Willa. I'm interning for Kate this spring, and I'm happy to be here. I'm glad you guys showed up.
Thank you, Willa. Thank you for being here and helping me figure out how to stream things on YouTube. We have Willa to thank for that. Accessibility is important. Who would like to go next?
I can go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Anderson. and I'm an intern from UVM for Representative Noyes.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I see Jessica's hand is up. Nice, nice job using the hand feature.
I thought I'd practice. I'm Jessica Bickford. I live in Johnson, and I'm happy to be here today and to hear what you guys are up to. Thanks for doing this.
Great, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, thank
That
you.
leaves me.
Yeah.
That leaves me. I'm Anne-Marie Barr. I also live in Johnson. I've been here 8 years. I'm a retired religious studies professor, taught at South Dakota State University.
Cool, welcome.
Thanks. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Dan, you wanna do
Sure.
one preference of?
So, good morning, Dan Noyes. I'm the rep for with Kate for Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere. This is my 5th year, or beginning of my third term. I'm on the Human Services Committee, where I've served for the last 2 terms, and yeah, it's really been a pleasure and an honor. Being a representative definitely is it's a lot of fun, and not when I first started running, it definitely was not what I expected, but it's a lot going on for sure. It makes the weeks go by really fast.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so I'm Kate Donnally. I serve alongside Dan Noyes, representing Lamoille 2, which again is Belvedere, Johnson, Hyde Park, and Wolcott. This is my first term, so these are just the first few weeks that I have been in this role. Went through a really great campaign experience, working really closely with Dan, and happy to share a little bit about myself personally outside of my legislative role. I have a wife and 2 young kids at home who when I'm not here or in my other professional capacity, I serve as some form of a jungle gym for small people. In my professional life, I am a therapist and a social worker, and I have a private practice that I operate in Morrisville, where I work with a variety of people. I am specifically trained in doing trauma-informed care and work, and that's a lens that I bring to everything in my life, but certainly also the legislative work that I'll be doing. I'm also a strong advocate in the community for social and racial equity, and prior to campaigning had been working really hard alongside a number of other community leaders to establish the Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille, and I still sit on the steering committee of REAL, although I have had to take a little bit of a step back just because of the demands of the campaign and then the demands of legislating. But I'm still closely connected with that community as well. So the bulk of the work, and I'm gonna say it this way because I don't know what everyone's sort of awareness is of the legislative process. Mine was very minimal before I ran. And so the way that the bulk of the work is done in the legislature is through committee. And so a lot of what we each sort of end up specializing in is the work that is funneled through our various committees. And so early, prior to legislative session starting, they send out a questionnaire. And so they take into account what your interests are, what your professional areas of expertise are. And then they also look at, they want to make sure that each committee is balanced in terms of geographic representation and party representation, all these various things. Anyway, so I had the Judiciary Committee as my #1 choice, and I was lucky enough to be placed on that committee, which I was pretty excited about. And so now I'm a couple of weeks into that work. And if we can maybe connect more about this if people have questions, but just to mention it, we just finished a day of work on committee of doing some team building around identifying values and priorities and mission. And so if anyone is interested in understanding a little bit more about who represents the Judiciary Committee on the state legislature and kind of what the values are that are represented on that committee, I am happy to share a link to that YouTube session. I found it to be a pretty interesting conversation. Is there anything else I'll say before I pause? Oh, one thing I'm going to say, because I didn't say it in the intro. I think as we're moving through this conversation, we'll just be sort of taking notes and gathering information about what people are interested in and what comes up. And my plan is to then, because I have your email addresses, send out a follow-up email with, you know, links to the things that we're talking about and stuff like that. So just to know that, if you're comfortable with that, anything we talk about here, we'll follow up with information that you need. All right. That was a mouthful. Yeah, so I think I'll pause here and just stop talking for a moment and step back and check in and see, Jessica and Anne-Marie, if there are any specific thoughts, questions, concerns that you brought with you to the meeting. Yeah.
Did I raise my hand?
Okay. Yeah.
On the floor.
Wonderful. I would appreciate the link on values, so thank you for volunteering to send that. My general interest in all of these things, of course, has to do with higher education and what's happening with solving the problems there. But I do have a very specific question, which probably you can't address right now, but maybe you could help a little bit to help solve this. Like a lot of people who are concerned with climate, I've put solar panels on my roof. I was able to do that finally when I retired. I had enough pennies to do it. And my entire house is now powered electrically. I'm hooked to the grid, but it's powered electrically. So I have a backup generator which runs on propane. And the generator companies, I mean, not the generator companies, the propane distributors in the area seem to be switching to, you have to rent the tanks. And the generator I have is a Generac, which is very common around here, very common type of generator. It requires 200-gallon tanks, and they're going to charge me $285 a year for that. Well, I use less propane than that per year. I only have to have my tanks refilled every 4 or 5 years because it only is used for power outages. So it doesn't make sense for me economically. And I guess it doesn't make sense for them economically to do anything different at this point. And I've been searching around. It does require the 200-gallon tanks, I'm told. And I've been searching around for an alternative, or what does one do if that becomes silly? You know, it's economically silly for me to do it that way anymore. So this, you know, I guess my question is this is loosely linked to the climate concerns and the climate, you know.
Yeah. So just a clarifying question, and I don't know, Dan, you were muted. I don't know if you were trying to respond, but so because I'm unfamiliar with this. Are you saying this is a regulation that has recently been enacted? Is that no?
Oh yes. I'm sorry. 8 years ago when I moved here and I had the tanks put up and the generator put up, the policy was that you got free use of the tanks, rental of the well, it wasn't a rental. You got free use of the tanks as long as you got the propane from them. It's not economically feasible, they're saying, for them to run out once every 4 or 5 years and sell me a little propane, you know, and let me keep the tanks for that, you know. So they're changing the policy, and now they want to charge what looks to me like a tremendous amount of money, I think it's 125 a tank, and then you add the taxes on that, and gets up close to 300 for a year. And
Right.
I figure out about what I pay for propane. If it costs $1,000 to fill it, which is possible, I'd be paying 200 maybe a year for the propane. So I'd be paying more for the tank sitting there than for the propane.
Right. Dan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting scenario because, I can see their concern is that, I don't know what they pay for these tanks. Have you asked them what they would sell you the tank for?
Yes, I have. That's one of the things I'm considering is just buying the tanks. One of the companies, I only have a response from one of the companies I contacted, and they charge $800 a tank. So that's 1,600 plus installation, and I don't, I suppose the tax is in addition to that.
Sure. I mean, definitely shop it around. These are 300-gallon tanks?
No, 100-gallon, two 100-gallon tanks.
100-gallon tanks.
And I've inquired into the reason for that because, of course, if I could use smaller tanks for the amount I use, but it has to do with the pressure. I'm told to start the unit, it requires a certain amount of pressure in the tanks. So,
if I were you, I would do a little more research on the size. I mean, have you reached out to Generac because I know that the propane tanks are under some pretty serious pressure, and then there's pressure reducer to send it to the tank, and to send it to the generator. So, it's worth looking into if you could get away with a couple of those ones you can buy down at Menards or whatever that are. I think they're 100. They're like 100 gallons. They're probably 5 feet tall or 4 feet tall or something like that. I don't know enough about it, but I bet there's somebody that may be able to come up with a solution. But I can definitely see their issue if it's every 5 years. That's yeah. And even wonder what those new Tesla batteries, if they're coming down in price enough, so you can just get rid of on sunny days, charge up your battery. Don't know. Thought.
That would be lovely. I don't know how to find out about that. Do you know how I would find out about the Tesla batteries?
Yeah, so I would check in with like Johnson Electric, because you're probably on Johnson Electric, or Efficiency Vermont. I would give them a call, and you may be able to just have a battery so that, when the sun's shining, you top it off, and, if you get a couple days like we get coming up here in February where the sun doesn't shine, you could draw off the battery. So I know at the State House, we just got rid of the generator that we've had, which was like this 1960s diesel generator that was like totally nasty for the environment, and we put in a series of batteries that can run the elevator, it can run all the lights, it can run the heating system if there's a power outage. And then we actually rent the battery usage of the battery to Green Mountain Power at the State House. So it was a new upgrade that they just did to kind of make the State House more green.
So you worked with Green Mountain Power? That's who you worked with?
Yeah, because that's who the power company is that provides electricity to the State House is GMP. But in Johnson, you're going to have the Village and...
I have VEC, and I've already talked to them about trying to get a battery, or did they know I could get a battery? And they said no.
I would check with Efficiency Vermont.
The what?
So Anne-Marie, sorry, I just want to jump in quickly just to let you know again that any of the things that we're bringing up as possible resources, I'm happy to send you direct contact information for after this meeting. So like a contact within Efficiency Vermont but the other thing is, I think part of what you're talking about is not so much state regulation, but the decision, like business decisions that the propane company is making that you're working with. But what I think, certainly I'm happy to offer is support in terms of advocacy. So I think in terms of this issue, if it's all right with you, I think what I might do is follow up with you after the meeting, again, with an email with resources, but then also like if you just need help in terms of advocacy of like making the phone call or just asking a couple extra questions, I'm happy to support you in that process.
Thank you. I have been calling a lot of people. I have not called Efficiency Vermont. I did work with them when I had the house set up. You know, it's had to be certified as efficient or something like that by them. So
Okay.
I have a history there, but I've not contacted them about the power of a possibility of a Tesla generator.
Yeah, and I think just sometimes like when you've been making this many phone calls, it can just be helpful to have someone help make a phone call. Like sometimes they just need one extra phone call. So if it's sorry, what's that?
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yes, and thank you for the brainstorming. That's helpful.
Yeah, so great. Yeah, and so again, after this, I'll follow up with some resources, and then let's stay in touch about, you know, again, just some ongoing advocacy about this issue. And I see Jessica's hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. So this is just more of a general question for you, Kate. You mentioned that you're we're still working in a trauma-informed private practice, and it's more related to just, you know, living in a pandemic or through a pandemic, you know, and just, you know, the collective impacts of, you know, the isolation on people, and, you know, what are the things that you're seeing that might be promising at the state level, but also what are the things that you see that we should be doing in the community to kind of reach out to our neighbors and you know, mitigate the long-term impacts of this. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good question. And I'll also check in with Dan around this. I'll offer sort of my response, and then Dan, being on the Human Services Committee, also has a pretty daily awareness of where some of the programming is happening on the state level around healthcare and mental health care. But I mean, just globally, like, people are really suffering right now. You know, I think obviously financially, but I keep talking about how it just feels like, just from like an energetic perspective, like humans in our local community and beyond have just been pushed to the absolute max of what they can handle, and then are being asked to wake up the next morning and do more and do more and do more. And, you know, I think about, I don't know if it's really answering your question, but I'll just say it because it's been on my mind recently related to this issue, is I feel like it brings an added level of importance to the decisions that we're making on the state level and the way that we're communicating about those decisions. Because I'll give an example, and we'll probably talk more about this, you know, throughout the morning, just because it's something that's come up and I wanted to bring it up anyway. But for example, teachers have been put through a tremendous amount through the course of this pandemic. We've relied so heavily on teachers to maintain some level of, and all school staff and school administration and everyone within that realm, but certainly teachers in terms of like the one-on-one daily support, relying on them, you know, to sort of maintain some semblance of normalcy and mental health care and physical health care, let alone education. And, you know, in many school districts have felt that they haven't gotten enough sort of clear guidance from the state and have felt sort of alone in how they're figuring these things out. So there's the added stress of that and feeling like they're having to constantly assess the best decisions for the community and for themselves, and then concerns now about vaccines, right? So if you just imagine the level of stress that like educators are experiencing, and then boom, you know, last week, Treasurer Pierce drops this, you know, report about the state of like pensions for the Vermont state teachers' pensions. And these are conversations that have to be had, right? Like we have to at some point talk about and address issues of pensions. But if you think about that in the context of what educators have been through and then have these things get dropped, that it's a lot. It's a lot. And so I just feel like from my perspective, one of the things that comes to mind for me that's so important, I think, in our communities, trying to circle back to your actual question, is being really vocal about how much we value each other and the work that we're doing in order to keep our communities functioning and moving forward. And it seems like a simple thing, but I think, again, using the example of educators, I think feel really undervalued right now for everything that they're doing and have been doing for all of us. And I think, it's not nearly enough, but even just naming that and naming how much we appreciate their work, I think is essential. And so as much of that as possible. And then, I've been really encouraged by the mutual aid networks that have been developed in the community. I think we've got some really fantastic folks locally that are organizing. And if anyone has any needs, I'm happy to help connect people with that. I think we'd benefit from some continuing to work to connect those systems. I think you have pockets of really well-organized communities, and then you have pockets that are less organized. And so continuing to build relationships and connectivity across these networks, I think, is really helpful. I'm going to pause there for a minute because I could keep talking about this for a while. But Dan, I don't know if you have any thoughts, or also just curious if through Human Services, if anything has come through related to, I guess maybe this would be in healthcare, if we're talking about sort of mental health, but I'm not sure if you have any thoughts about this question.
Sure. So mostly in our committee, we've been looking at budgets, the budget adjustment and stuff like that. So this year, not so much yet, but if I put a different hat on, which is my other job, which is running RSVP, recruiting volunteers for companionship home delivered meals. Definitely, we have seen older Vermonters. We've seen quite a spike in the need for companionship, and have been really working on some programs around just calling people, checking in on them. I know Meals on Wheels and home health programs have really been trying to look out and stay connected with older Vermonters that they serve. So yeah, I mean, definitely the pandemic has, really increase that need for companionship, in especially in rural Vermont where we are. One of the things that I've been trying to look at, and actually had a little bit of a breakthrough this week, is accessibility for telemedicine and companionship through access to internet for older Vermonters who may not be able to afford access to the internet, and trying to look at going to get into the weeds a little bit, but how to look at how we negotiate our Medicaid waiver with the federal government, and finding out if there's a possibility, if we can include access to the internet in individuals who are on Medicaid, as a way to make sure that they have access to one of these iPad things or who knows what, so that they're, can have a little more companionship, especially in these winter months. But it turns out that under current regulations, it's not an allowable expense. However, I reached out to Senator Sanders' office, and they thought it was an interesting idea, and we'll be working with the new administration on what that may look like. So it's now kind of in the hands of the DAIL, which is the Vermont Department of Aging Independent Living, and Senator Sanders' office. So we'll see. It might be something, we renegotiate this contract for Medicaid reimbursement every so many years. So we'll have to see. It might be also a way to really help with our communication union districts, because we would have more take up and there would be more economic ability for them to provide internet. So this is something kind of roundabout way looking at companionship and kind of the impacts that COVID has had on our community about getting out. I know that I miss being at the State House. It's totally a different experience being on Zoom, and of course, even being in the room with all of you as we normally would be at maybe the Hyde Park Library or the Johnson Library or who knows where, which is the way I've been doing them for years for these community conversations. So, but yeah, good question, and it's definitely going to be taking up a lot of our thought processing here in months to come.
And I think, just adding to what Dan said, I mean, I feel like in terms of supporting the overall mental health and health care of folks through this process, I think we always have to center like the most immediate needs, like human needs, right? Like food and access to food is a big one that comes to mind. Safety, certainly. And so thinking about efforts that are working to expand access to food for Vermonters. I just saw that, I'm forgetting the name of I'm not going to be able to find it in time, but I know that they have just recently infused more money into statewide efforts to provide 3 squares, and then there's also more of a state-based approach, like local approach that recently got, I think, $1.5 million to continue their efforts. And so I think that's a big piece of it too, is making sure that people's like most immediate needs are being met, which again, I think that the mutual aid networks have done a really nice job of that. And the other thing I'll say, and I think this speaks just to like the importance of these kind of efforts outside of COVID, like Jessica, I don't know, are you aware of the AWARE program? Mariana, yeah, you're shaking your head. Yeah. So Mariana Donnally, who my wife is a social worker as well, works for the state, and she's sort of a liaison between the Department of Mental Health and the Agency of Ed, and has been working on a large grant that is working on really sort of reimagining the relationship between mental health care and schools. And, these are the kind of efforts in my mind from a policy perspective and a program perspective that we really need to be prioritizing, and that like would pay dividends in a time like COVID, where those systems and structures would be in place, and it wouldn't be this emergent situation of having to like throw stuff at a problem, but like building these really thoughtful integrated systems so that when emergencies arise, we have really, really good, sound, like well integrated care in spaces like schools, where so many young people are present and engaging. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you for the question. Do you guys have any other thoughts or questions that you came with this morning?
I just would like to shout out to the education system in Vermont. It's certainly having its problems, but one of the main reasons I moved here is the support for education here. I know that sounds silly to those of you who are listening to how much deficit there is in terms of education funding right now, but the state I came from consistently vied with Mississippi for being lowest in the nation in terms of what they paid teachers. So this kind of seems like heaven. I just hope that we can find a way to continue to support our teachers.
I'm sure we will. I mean, when, this is not the way what we're looking at in terms of the problems with the pensions, not only with teachers, but state employees. We've been working on these for years, and we tend to figure out how to get through a crisis like we have now, and I'm sure we will, just like with our state college system. So definitely be a lot of discussion around how we fund higher education as well as our pension liability. So.
I thank you for giving that amount of attention to it. Really nice to be in a state that does that. It makes a difference to the whole atmosphere of the state and how they work together and how they can talk together. It's wonderful being here.
I feel like I want to take that audio and just like put it on a loop and just share it all over social media. That sounds good. No, but it is really lovely to hear you say that. I mean, I think this is an area that, for good reason, generates some of the most robust and challenging conversations across the state, because it's where the bulk of our taxes go to. And it's a process that involves children and our future as a state. And, I mean, there's a lot at stake when we're talking about education. And so that people have a lot invested in it. And these are, again, they're hard conversations to have, but I appreciate your thoughts and feedback. And, I think the state obviously is better for being able to have these robust conversations. And at the center of it, I think there is a really strong value around education, and that is a priority in our state. And it's just figuring out how to do it, how to provide it in an equitable fashion so that, certain communities aren't being asked to, cover a disproportionate amount of the cost, how to ensure that young people are getting their needs met, regardless of what those needs are. So it's a lot to consider. Jessica, if you are comfortable asking the question now, we have until 10, so we have a little bit of time. So on the chat, you had a question.
Okay. Yeah, so my question is really just, I guess, a process question. So Act 164 got approved, and which is the retail cannabis law. And so towns are starting to consider whether they're voting on that in March or not. And then the other piece is that this week, S25 was introduced on the Senate side, and I think it's probably to answer some of the unanswered questions in Act 164. But what's just the process if another bill is introduced while another one's being enacted? So just a process question.
Yeah. Tell me, what's the bill that was introduced in Senate? What?
S25 by Senator Benning.
Okay, so.
And I started reading it. I haven't got fully through it.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So just to your question about, what happens when legislation gets introduced when we're already trying to implement past legislation. So that's one of the interesting things about our role in state government as legislators, is we can't bind future legislators. So we can change whatever the last group did. So unless it's a change in our Constitution, where you would have to go back through that constitutional process, which takes, about 6 years, a legislature can change even within the biennium. So, there's a couple bills that have been introduced that I'd like to look back at and see, maybe we need to modify, some of the, some of the unforeseen impacts they're having. So I haven't read Senator Benning's bill, but, there's definitely going to be changes on the rollout of the cannabis retail over the years. I mean, when I first got here, we were looking at cannabis for symptom relief, and that was kind of the first step that the state looked at. And I think every session we've changed those laws since I've been here. That comes through my committee, and it seems like every session there's a tweak. We're doing something technical, a technical change that's coming to us from either law enforcement or the people that are trying to administer the program are looking back and saying, well, when you originally proposed this legislation, this is how we thought it would, impact, or how we thought we would roll it out. But we're finding, that we really need to make some systemic changes to this, and so they'll present legislation. It will either come from a legislator who's involved with that particular part. It might come from the administration, so it might come from the Department of Health, or it might come from the Department of Public Safety, and that will come through into our committee and be what they call a committee bill, or it could be introduced by a particular legislator who's working with the administration to make technical changes. So I would say that over the next how many years, there's going to be changes every year to that. I think setting it up the way it is now was kind of a first take on it, and we'll have to see where it goes.
Can I, Jessica, not to put you on the spot, but Jessica plays a big role in our local community in terms of education and public health. And I don't know if you're comfortable sharing a little bit more about like what you do in your role. And I don't know if you have any specific thoughts or questions about the legislation or things you want to make sure are on our radar.
Yeah, thank you. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Jessica Bickford, and I'm the coordinator of Healthy Lamoille Valley, and we're a substance prevention coalition serving Lamoille County and the greater Hardwick area. And our primary mission is to prevent and reduce youth substance misuse. And so, we look at Vermont is the third highest in the nation, according to the CDC right now, for youth cannabis use or marijuana use, depending on which term you're wanting to use. We're trying to get away from using the term marijuana just because it does have some inequity language in that. But we also recognize that that's the common term that most people are familiar with. And then we also look at Lamoille County has higher than state averages. So just as this is being rolled out, just ensuring that towns are doing it in a thoughtful manner. It's not our role to tell towns how to vote. We're just here to provide, assistance, education materials. The Journal of American Medicine this week released a study, and I can share the link. Just how, youth with mood disorders, cannabis use will, can increase the likelihood of self-harm and suicidality. So just, getting that information out, especially when the brain's still developing, that students really need to not, start using. And so that's going to be a really important message going forward. And I think we need to have a really unified message around that, but also, just in our communities as they're rolling it out, just making sure that, there things like signage, I know the state's still determining what that's going to look like, but making sure that that is, the least intrusive, for a couple of reasons. One is it's just the makeup of our towns, and what we value in Vermont, but also, just the impact that, depending on how things are marketed, can have on our youth. So, so it's just kind of, we're here, we have Allison Link, who's our policy and community outreach coordinator. She also oversees our tobacco prevention grant. And she's, happy to work with towns to provide guidance. We're encouraging towns to kind of create wellness committees that they can really kind of look at, what are the values of the town? How do we create wellness, not just around substance misuse, but just in general, because we know when towns are well, that's a protective factor for the youth. So it's really an all-encompassing work. We have a youth coordinator who's just started in the last couple of months, and he's starting to really, try to find new ways to connect with youth, which is also an interesting thing to do when it's all over Zoom. So, but we have strong relationships with our schools and our school partners, and that's actually increased since March. So, so we have a lot of exciting things. And if anybody's interested, they could check out our website, healthylamoillevalley.org. So, thank you.
Good work.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thanks for that intro.
Hey, I just took a quick peek at that bill, and it really is kind of soup to nuts. in terms of going through all different parts of the bills that we passed in the past to kind of change some stuff. What I found really quickly interesting is if this bill proceeds, and it's going to be in both Kate's committee and my committee, because there are technical changes that would be in judiciary, and there's also changes to substance misuse prevention funding, which we said that 30% of the excise tax should go to education and prevention programs. We put that in my committee, in the Human Services Committee, and this limits it to 10 million. So definitely interesting how they, want to cap it in this particular legislation. So I'll be interested to hear the testimony on that, should it make it to our committee. So a lot of stuff here, definitely Criminal Justice Council and training for law enforcement are Kate's committee. So when the bills come in, we break them down. If this would also end up in Ways and Means, from what I see. So it will go through a gamut of committees before it gets voted on the floor and moved on to the governor, should that happen. So I'm sure there'll be other pieces of legislation that are considered this session or next when we're back in the building.
Can I ask a follow-up question from
Yeah.
a legislator's point of view? And if you don't feel comfortable answering it, that's okay. So would you recommend that people go ahead and opt in this year, or is it, more prudent to, kind of wait until it's all sorted out, in the next year or so, because there's so many things undetermined? And if you can't say, that's okay.
No, I mean, I definitely think that, it's retail only. All the other aspects of it are not regulated at the local level. They're all at the state. So basically, a town is putting to the voters whether or not they want to have retail cannabis in their community. I mean, I think, sure, throw it to the voters, but I always think that that's what makes democracy work. But there is a lot of unanswered questions, and in fact, I know that while we were debating this bill, there was a number of legislators that voted no because of the number of unanswered questions within how the rollout of the retail market will look. And, I think it's going to be up to the legislators to start correcting that. But to answer your question, I mean, it's up to the town. And, if the select board feels that they want to put it to the voters now, they can always go back. I believe they can say next year, no, that was a bad idea. Before it even happens, it's not going to happen until 2023 anyways. So it gives us some time. Kate, I don't know if you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky thing. There's in Vermont, we really value that separation, right, of local versus state. And I think this is really a local question. I think it's a great question, and a great question for the municipal bodies that are trying to make this decision around whether or not to put it on their ballot. Which I'm curious, do folks know, does anyone right now within Lamoille County have it on their agenda for town meeting? Did Johnson?
Johnson might. So there was a meeting, last select board meeting, that there was some interest in some language changing of what had been put, because Johnson actually waived the petition requirement. So basically they said they put anything on the ballot that came in as long as it was not unsafe. And so the select board was going to potentially change the language with the buy-in of the person that had submitted it. But then they checked with lawyers, and it seems like they might not be able to do that. So there's actually going to be a discussion this next Monday of whether the select board feels like they can put it on the ballot or not, just given the ambiguity. And then Hardwick discussed it this past Monday, or no, Thursday, and decided that they would not put it on the ballot this year. They wanted to continue to watch it, see how it evolved, and then they'll, you know, they may have a special meeting mid-year, or they may put it on next year's, but they wanted a little more information. So those are the two communities that I know that it had gotten to that level of select board discussion. I know that some, you know, development review board or planning commissions have had conversations, but I don't believe any other communities have, you know, put it that far forward yet. Although some communities are still accepting community petitions, so it could come in that way as well. So
Wolcott talked about it at their select board meeting, their last one.
okay.
I don't think they made a decision, but they did have some discussion about it. I was at the meeting and they were talking about it, whether they should put it on the ballot or not. And there was definitely a lot of discussion around the fact that, you know, there's a lot of questions. In fact, so I'll just, it'll be interesting to see how this rolls out across the state. I think you're going to see your early adapters be more of communities that have a larger tourism market. Just my opinion. You know, I don't think the towns are going to see a lot of revenue from this unless they have a 1% option tax.
Yeah.
And I think, Jessica, I imagine you probably know this because you follow these things, but my understanding is that Middlebury was the first town to really sort of like move forward with this. And so it'd be interesting to keep an eye on Middlebury and see how things are unfolding there. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because not only, you know, the municipal government and what they want to do and what the community wants to do, but also like when there's that many questions, what do businesses want to do, you know, at the end of the day.
Right.
So
yeah,
good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Vermont Growers Association had a good meeting last Friday night of just, you know, what are the issues still surrounding this and such. So it was a good forum. So
nice. Was that recorded? Do you know?
I believe so. I can see if I can find the contact info to pass on to you. So
that'd be awesome. Yeah, if you don't mind, if you find it, if you don't mind emailing me, that would be great. All right, it is 9:58. Want to honor people's time and be prompt, but also just any final thoughts, questions? Yes, Anne-Marie.
Yep, just a quick personal check. I've been concerned about the lack of attention to different religions in our attempts to be more multicultural. And I know it's not something that's been taught a lot in Vermont. And so I have volunteered to teach a course that would be run through it would be hosted, not run through, but hosted. The space would be hosted by the United Church in Johnson, but I would teach it as a purely objectives. This is what the religions believe. This is where there are conflict areas in our country and in the world between different religions and between religions and non-religious people and governments, and how have we tried to handle that? Just bring people up to date a little bit on the conversation around that as we think about building a multicultural society. So I'm assuming there isn't any law against my just doing that. It wouldn't be for pay. It would be open to the public. It would be located in the United Church in Johnson. If people chose to give a donation to the church, you know, as a thank you for offering the space, I was thinking I would say you can do that, but you don't have to pay me. I want to do this as a community service. Am I stepping on any laws there?
Nope.
Okay.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, part of the group, the Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille, and within that group, like one of the primary steering committee members is the rabbi within the Stowe Jewish community. JCOGS is the name of their space, but Rabbi David is great. And if you ever wanted to make some connections, like within the county of folks who are working on sort of like similar, doing similar type work, I'm happy to make those connections.
Well, that would be great. I didn't know anybody was. I know about JCOGS, and I was thinking of inviting them as a speaker when I talked about Judaism, but I didn't know anybody else was really focusing on the same kind of thing I was trying to do. But yes, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's been a number of folks in our communities who've been impacted by anti-Semitism, and it's been sort of part of the ongoing conversation around equity of how do we ensure safety for youth in our schools and people in our communities in general. And so it's been sort of like woven into the equity conversations. And the, Small World, Allison Link, who Jessica mentioned before, works at Healthy Lamoille, is the wife of Rabbi David, and so all of these communities are all very intertwined. But I'm happy to make a connection between you and the rabbi and see if your work, aligns in any kind of way.
Yeah, and that would be good. I was just going to contact him through the website, but yeah, I would also like to invite him to be a guest speaker, and that's the only person I knew. But I'm happy to hear that people are discussing this in the health services, counseling services. I was distressed when UVM mentioned religious studies as one of the things that they were planning on cutting, because I just think it's so necessary. So that was part of my response was to that. But I had also noticed when I first came that where I worked before, we had a very robust world religions component, but we also had a lot of Hindu people, we had a lot of Muslim people, and I know we don't have that in our small communities, but it's coming, it's coming, and we're connected to the rest of the world, and it's definitely, it's been a very difficult political issue. It's been a very difficult economic issue. On a bigger scale, what should be the relationship of the religions to these other structures? And they're embedded there, but they're embedded in different ways and sometimes in violent ways. And so it's just work I thought needed to be done. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for taking initiative in that. And we can connect more outside of this space. And I'll just add, and again, I know folks want to jump out of here, but, I think engaging in these kinds of conversations is so important on so many levels. But I will just say that I think one of the things that seems has been the most difficult for municipal governments around here is engaging in these conversations of equity, social equity, racial equity. It is really sort of torn at the fabric of our local governments. And I feel like offering educational opportunities, whether it's in our schools, whether it's outside of this, helping people learn language around how to have these conversations, like engaging in conversations of equity is a skill set. It's something that we have to learn how to do. And it's something that, it's part of the reason it's so essential in our schools, because we're raising leaders in the future. And part of the reason this is so difficult on a local municipal level is because people don't have the skill set. They don't know how to have these conversations in a way that's productive. And so anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but I feel like there's a lot of value outside of course, creating safe spaces and safe environments for people to move into, and also helping young people in our communities learn how to develop the skill set so that our communities in the future can have more success at having these conversations than we are right now, you know?
Yeah, and I was going to include a section on African American Christian churches, just almost as a reaction to what happened with President Obama's pastor, and people saying, well, criticizing him so wildly for that and saying that's not Christianity. I thought, whoa, who are you? And I also do have, I'll just pass this along, some expertise. I'm not Native American, but I worked a lot with the Lakota people. And so they are much more organized at this point than the Wabanaki people. And so we had courses, you know, we had to, being in South Dakota, include it in the educational programs. And so if anybody wants any information on that or wants to connect, I do have some background in that as well.
Great, thank you. So yeah, like I said, we'll make email contact outside of this space and we can share these various resources. All right, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for our first one. Right on.
Yeah. Dan, do you want to do any closing remarks, or are we?
No,
good?
Just looking forward to doing these again, and glad everyone showed up. It's been great working with Brian this session. I'm pretty lucky to have an intern working with the older Vermonters stuff with Teresa and I. So, thank you. Just want to give Brian a shout out.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how I would be doing this without the support of Willa. Can't keep my head on straight. All right, you guys, it's lovely.
Yeah.
Fourth Saturday of every month, we'll send out the links again, and we'll keep connecting.